Alors nous pouvons donc reprendre notre série d'exposés. Il en reste encore deux. Il est vrai c'est la fin de la journée, mais ce sont des exposés qui sûrement sont intéressants à suivre. Donc nous allons donner la parole à Madame Judith Van Doorn. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. I will speak in English because I'm more comfortable and also to make sure everybody understands. When I looked at the program, I realized that I will talk around 4:30 on a sunny Thursday afternoon. And I thought I have to do something to not put everybody to sleep. So I'm trying to make this a little bit interactive. I also do a lot of trainings, so I have a little bit of a habit of being interactive. So I hope you have energy to go along with me. So I just wanted to start with, well, okay, this is the content, first introduction, then we talk about why formalization is difficult, then we look at what is the ILO approach, and we look at what we know so far. So, in terms of introduction, let's do a little quiz. Do you know what is this? What do we have on this picture? Can you guess?
The conference hall.
That's during summer.
Conference of the ILO, yes. And there's a woman holding a document. So in the context of the subject, what would she be holding in her hand?
Maybe the conclusions and recommendations.
Exactly. Okay, so I thought it could be a press release, future work, no. Driver's license, which she obtained recently, no. Autogram for the Director General, the ILO also not. She got the ILO recommendation 204 on the transition from the informal to the formal economy, which was adopted in 2015. So, very good. Now, what is this recommendation about? It's a first international labor standard to focus on the informal economy in its entirety. And we spoke already about the fact that we have been talking about the informal sector in the past, and Florence spoke about informal employment. So this is bringing it all together, looking at the informal sector, looking at informal employment both in informal enterprises but also in formal enterprises. It actually looks at transition to formality as a means to achieving decent work for all. And it uses this recommendation as a framework for guidance to our member states. So we now have more of a document where our constituents agree on this is how to do it, so we can provide support. And also it acknowledges that for a part of the workforce, the reduction of decent work deficits can be considered as a first step towards progressive formalization in the longer term. So it's looking at addressing decent work deficits in the informal economy as paving the way and hopefully gradually then afterwards transitioning from the informal to the formal economy. And it looks at formalization as a means and not an end. We don't go in and say we want to formalize you. We actually want to achieve other objectives. So what objectives do we want to achieve when we talk about formalization? What do you think? We already heard a few before with the previous speaker. Why do we try to formalize workers or businesses?
More regular contracts, better conditions of employment.
Yes. Yes, better employment conditions, decent work. Yes.
So that we'll be able to tax and then use it for the common of all.
Exactly. So the perspectives are different, right? Decent work is from, let's say, ILO, the workers' side. Government will look at it in terms of taxation, but also then serving the people better, right? Okay. Yes.
There is another thing, simplification of the legal issues which pertain to formalization.
Yes.
For example, no?
Yes, but that's more of a means to an end.
Yeah.
So making it easier for businesses to do business, which can then lead to economic growth, right?
And training.
Yes, also training, yes. Okay, how do the employers the big companies, how do they look at the informal sector? Why are they not happy with the informal sector?
Because of tax improvements.
Yeah, unfair competition. They say, you know, we comply with the rules and the informal ones don't.
They don't pay taxes, service, and other things.
Exactly, okay. We're doing very well. My strategy is working. Reduce unfair competition, right? Which I was saying, the companies are saying this. Empower vulnerable entrepreneurs, right? Also looking at more and better jobs, the decent work agenda, and increasing taxpayer space, looking at government perspective. From the perspective of the enterprises, we're also looking at increasing access to markets, so that when you have a more formal business, it's easier for you to maybe engage in a public bidding or sell to a formal company. Facilitate access to finance, we spoke about that. Increasing productivity, which is really needed for these enterprises to go to the next level and be able to actually formalize. And increase business income for the enterprises. Okay, so, yes?
Yeah, but maybe just say that here it's for enterprise because in the end it also increases workers' income.
Yes, so increase business income, which will link to the orange speak bubble, which is more and better jobs. So you can hire more people, you can actually pay a decent income if you have more income yourself as the entrepreneur. See, I was working to that.
It can also sanitize the system. I mean, and to sanitize the system. With the advent of technology and other things, somebody can be in this room and be doing his own thing, but when it's formalized, you can move up all those companies. All those entities.
Yes,
yeah.
So I guess that's also linked to enforcement or visibility or technology, right? Yeah. So the systems help to also improve the formalization of the workers. Yes. Okay, let's look at a few concepts. So in the ILO, in our recommendation, how do we define informal economy? We talk about, this refers to all economic activities by workers and by economic units. You know, it doesn't talk about business, but economic units that are either in law or in practice not covered or insufficiently covered by formal arrangements. So Gervais was also talking about it, right? Are the laws in place? But even if they are in place, are they being complied to? You may be protected as a worker by the law, but if in practice the businesses are not complying with the law, you're still in trouble. Right? Florence was talking about the contracts. You may have a contract, but you don't have the social security. So it's looking at the law, but also the practice. And it does not cover illicit activities. So let's say drugs trade is not included in the informal economy, it's something else. And then again, if we look at economic units in the informal economy, we look at units that employ hired labor, but also those that are owned by individuals working on their own accounts, and Florence and others spoke about it, either alone or with the help of a contributing family member. And it also includes cooperatives, social economy units. So this is economic units or enterprises that we're talking about. Now, we spoke about the different, let's say, dimensions of formalization. So one thing, like Michael was talking, his wife, she's paying taxes, but the business is not registered. So that's one dimension of formalization. So when you register the business, you go one step up the formalization ladder. That's how I like to look at it. And also this person here, he has his license on his desk. He also, in addition to registering the business, he needs to comply maybe with sector requirements, you know, other type of licenses, in addition to simply registering the business. But also, you may have registered your business, but you may not pay the taxes, or you may not pay taxes on everything that you're selling. So that's another dimension of formalization, is to be tax compliant. And in addition to what Natalie was saying, you know, Airbnb, maybe I'm paying taxes, but am I declaring my workers for Social Security? That's another dimension of formalization. And then we also have large companies that may deliberately avoid taxes, so under declaration. So it looks at a broad range of businesses where some dimensions of informality may appear. So when we look at definitions, we follow the national definition. But some countries don't have national definitions of informal enterprises, so then we look at these dimensions. Are we together on this? Good. So why is formalization difficult? What do we think? Why do enterprises not want to formalize?
More that it's just precisely that you have formalization for enterprise on the one side, and then you have formalization for employment. And just to think formalization, it's not on the enterprise.
Yes.
Oh, it increases the cost of hiring and the liability of the organization in the long term, and also reduces the flexibility to adapt to their interaction with the market, company, the profits, and the business cycle.
Yes. So there's a cost implication and reduced flexibility. Yeah. Implicitly, I'm also hearing you say that maybe you also get away with it, right? If you're not complying with these laws and there's weak enforcement, then that's what you do.
Maximize that.
Yes.
Change is difficult for many people. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time. When they say go and formalize it, it's difficult for them to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, and also maybe they want to evade taxation.
Yes, yeah, the tax evasion is mentioned. It may be very complex. If you look at the ease of doing business, in some countries it takes a few months to register your business, and it takes like 50 procedures, and it takes money. Whereas in other countries you can do it in one day. But in addition to complexity, you also may not even know where to start. So it's about the knowledge and it's about the procedures. Okay, anything else?
Well, I have one thing that it's not only about unemployed or business people who don't want to be formalized, but for example, in the case of a favela in Rio, which I visited some time ago, they do business, but they prefer to continue living in the favelas. And that's an acceptance of a way of living which is very far away from formalization. The same in India. I have seen also that people living in the street, they are offered houses, jobs, but they prefer to continue living in the streets. So it's a question of culture also.
But also linked, yeah, the culture is important, but also maybe linked to the aspect of productivity. Because if you're living in the favela, maybe you're doing some trading, selling on the streets, but you make a very small margin.
But so you pay very, very little.
Yes, but if you pay social security, if you have employees, you pay social security, you're paying, it's a cost. And at the same time, you're not seeing the benefit. You only see that you're paying taxes, social security. What do you get in return? And sometimes you don't know what your government is doing with the money. So we're already kind of paving the way for my next slides. So let's look at what is that. So limited information and support on how to register. We spoke about it. Also low inspection and enforcement. So I get away with it, maybe I pay a small bribe. That's it, they leave me alone. So it's cheaper than paying all the taxes and social security. High registration and compliance cost, we spoke about it. Low benefits to formalize, what is in it for me, right? Lack of capacity to formalize, which is linked to productivity. If I have small margins, I cannot pay all of these costs. And also low intention. There may be the bigger companies who deliberately underdeclare taxes. So that means you can do all of these other things, but if there's no intention and if they, deliberately avoid taxes, then it's very difficult to address. And then we've seen also low national income and stagnant growth, economic growth in the country may also affect the informality, right? So talking a lot about problems, but let's look forward also. What can be done? ILO approach. We like to think of this issue as a formalization pyramid, where at the top we have the formalized SMEs, And at the bottom, we have the subsistence or necessity entrepreneurs. Maybe in the favelas, maybe the ones who are barely making a living. And why are they there? Because they don't find a wage job. They would like to be employed, but there's no job. So they struggle to make a living. So we cannot expect them to formalize. Somebody mentioned it already. Was it you? I think you mentioned it. You can't formalize everything. You have to focus somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
So that is why we look at the middle segment. You know, those that are ready to formalize, willing to formalize, but they need some incentives or persuasion. If they look at the costs, they know what they will have to pay, but what are the benefits? So this is where we in the ILO really emphasize to do many things to make it easier, more affordable, but also make it more attractive to formalize. So to move up a step on this formalization ladder, what we're saying is that targeting is very important. We also assume that entrepreneurs make a rational choice to formalize or not. And they compare the expected benefits. So can I get access to a market? Can I be integrated in a value chain? Can I apply for public procurement? Can I get formal finance when I have a formal business? Can I go to a bank? Do I get government business development services? What about social security? Maybe I get social security when I formalize through some incentive scheme. And also, what is the risk of business closure? If there's a lot of enforcement and they come and knock on my door every day, I may be more inclined to formalize. So these are all factors that may make me to decide that, yes, maybe I should formalize my business. And at the same time, I will look at the costs. How much does it cost to register the business? How many taxes do I need to pay? What about social security, etc.? So the entrepreneurs will look at this balance. So we need to make sure that we reduce the costs and that we increase the benefits. So that is the approach that we take. So in terms of support, this is what we look at: sensitization and capacity development, so that people are familiar with what are the advantages and what are the costs. But also sensitization of government and our partners on this whole concept, and not looking at formalization only as registering a business. Then also looking at streamlining regulation, registration, licensing, and compliance. I was talking about, for example, ease of business, making it less procedures, less days, less costs, so that is becoming less of a bottleneck. Also putting in place incentives, so access to markets, business linkages, access to social security. There's countries in, for example, Latin America that have experimented with providing access to social security under a certain scheme, and this has been actually quite effective, not costly also for the government. Enhancing productivity, because if you look at the formalization pyramid, you can only target the middle segment. So you have to make sure that businesses can grow, have a bigger margin, so that they then actually can comply with the costs. Looking at dialogue, as the ILO, we bring together social partners and the government and see what are the priorities and what are the bottlenecks, and how can we address some of these. Strengthening enforcement and compliance, because we need both carrots and sticks, and fostering linkages for external support. One example on linkages for external support for us has been UNCTAD. I will talk about a country where we worked in Cameroon, and this is where we've been joining forces. So I'm happy that UNCTAD is also here in the room. So our process is that we identify requests for support from the government or constituents, and then we engage with the stakeholders to coordinate the process. And then we organize a sensitization or training workshop. And then we conduct an assessment to identify the issues, the opportunities, and the challenges. And then we validate the findings from the assessment. And then we assist our partners to develop an action plan and a roadmap, after which we can move into implementation. Now, we have kind of recently finalize this methodology. We've been working on formalization for a while, but with a new kind of approach recently, and we have tested it in Cameroon. So when we went through this whole diagnosis process, we came up in the end with an action plan, which consists of these components. And we are now in the stage of looking at the registration, starting to address some of the constraints. And for the other themes or priorities, we are going to partner with the government and the donors to see what can be done and how we can jointly mobilize resources. But just to show you that we look at registration, but we also look at taxes, making it easier to comply, looking at what needs to be done, maybe having a certain incentive scheme, looking at access to social security for entrepreneurs, access to finance, business development services, increasing productivity, access to public and private markets, and sensitization and information sharing. And this is in line with the thinking of the recommendation, which is covering or addressing all these subtopics. And with UNCTAD, our partnership is on the registration streamlining. Now, so what do we know so far? This is a recap of, I think, the things we have already said, but I just like to wrap it up and put it together. Targeting is important. Don't target survivalist entrepreneurs, you will not be successful, but look at that middle segment in the pyramid. Also, entrepreneurs make the rational choice on whether or not to formalize, which is the balance. And interventions should include both carrots and sticks. And it's important to increase productivity. And lastly, formalization of enterprises has many facets, and combining several reform measures may work better than piecemeal approaches, so it's important to find the right policy mix. On that, just one final sentence is that the examples that we've been documenting from Latin America, Brazil and Chile, etc., they have taken, like, say, 20 years, they've been tweaking, and they are still looking at how to improve. So there's no quick fix, there's no one-size-fits-all. It's a process, but we need to start somewhere, and the recommendation provides for us a very good foundation. Thank you.